And we are live. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining another Seattle Data Guy Live. We're doing two this week. If you missed it earlier this week, we talked to Alex Analyst, who was talking about consulting. And today we're talking to Jeff. Jeff, I'd love for you to give a quick background about yourself. What I know is that you have been working in the data world for a long time, which is great. I love hearing from people who've been I love hearing from people who've been doing it, especially through all of the different changes. And now you're working as a director, but you've been doing that, I think, a few roles. So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about your background.
Oh, sure. So I've been in the industry for I guess it's 31 years now, which makes you feel really old to say, right? Like old people are over 30, right? Been working in data. I'm fairly boring in that way. I've been working in data for that entire time. First as an engineer, software engineer, data engineer, then as an architect, and then as lead architect, and then into directing and building teams that do this. So small companies, large companies, global companies as well. So it's been fun. It's been a good time. So
yeah. I think I saw before your current role that you were at Expedia, right?
Right.
Yeah.
One, hands down, one of the best data companies I have ever worked for. They talk about travel, but really inside of Expedia, they are brilliant engineers and data driven. So
yeah. I feel like with just whenever you think about the business, whenever anything has to do with like logistics, I always feel like that is a far harder data problem. Like it's not to like talk down about like, a Facebook or something like that, but like everything there is digital. And so I think that like gives you a certain set of problems and also some nice things about your life. And then I think when you start dealing with real things, real people moving around, suddenly that data becomes very different. So it's something I've always kind of felt.
I think with Expedia, one of the nice things about it was that you have an anchor to reality. So flight tickets, hotels, things like that. So you've got real objects. I think what's interesting is one of the challenges when you get into the purely digital world, which, streaming or like Facebook and social media, is that you're literally building from whole cloth. You're building things that have never existed. You're building virtual objects. And when you try to give them substance and form, it's far harder because then you're trying to educate people consistently on that. And so when you're building tables or you're building systems that handle that data, it's far harder because then everybody has their own perspective on what a product is, or what a view is, or what should be contained in a user.
Yes.
So
I feel like is that a problem? Like I feel like we continue with this problem today, which is like defining even basic things like a user, a customer. Is that a problem that you feel like we've been dealing with for the last 31 years?
It really isn't. And the funny thing is, but way back when, back in the day, right? You had the relational databases, and as soon as you defined something, it became part of infrastructure. So you had to be really careful about how you designed it. So you spent months designing the right user table and things like that. And we just don't move that carefully anymore, right? Or we don't have the time for that anymore. So it's really become, as you've seen the next generation and the generation after that of data systems, it's become more to the point where you need to be able to build data models that are composable, right? You may have a user table that has 10 columns or 20 columns or 30 columns, whatever else. You don't want it to become 600 columns. And I say that only partially sarcastically, because I've walked into organizations where you have a 600 column user table because it's every piece that they've added. But you start to want to think about how your data is volatile versus durable, right? And so the durable pieces you put in the core, but then you need to be able to link to other sets, that may or may not have the same lasting value, right? I think one of the issues there is you get into modeling, right? After you got out of relational modeling, people started to say, and this was a big problem in like 2010, well, the days of modeling are over. No more modeling. We can do schema on read. Just drop it all in the lake. It'll be fine. Hadoop will take care of everything. It was quite the nightmare back then.
It feels like an interesting like. Do you feel like that was more of a marketing thing, or do you feel like that was just like everyone was so tired? Like everyone was so tired of like spending 2 years modeling out your enterprise data
Modeling's
warehouse. You're
hard.
like, yes, let's do that.
Right. No, modeling's hard, right? Modeling is really hard. Getting it right is really hard. And when you want something to be durable and long lasting, it's really hard, right? So the value of that Hadoop brought was the ability to be flexible. But the what we found and what we've learned and what's coming back around is a sensibility that you still need to know what's in there, even if it's variant, right? And there are ways of modeling it so that you can scale, because at a certain point, your costs start to hockey stick, right? Because you don't have the same kind of tuning that you would with a relational system. It's the same thing that Mongo suffered from. It's the same thing that with Cassandra and now Dynamo and things like that. They're all great systems, but they all have different uses, right? Like for Dynamo, it's a great key value store. If I want to see all of the products that Ben has purchased in the past month, I can go look up Ben's products and bam, I've got it. But in that same structure, if I go to Dynamo and I say, I want to see everyone who bought toothbrushes, it's the wrong tool, right? And I think that's part of it, is trying to get a feel for what's the right platform or the right form for what you're trying to do. Right?
That it's just again, it's an interesting thing to look back on in history, when it's like, oh yeah, everyone was like, I came in right about either maybe towards the end or middle of that whole phase, and it was like everyone was like schema on read. And I was like, what is schema on read? I don't, it's one of those terms I think you don't understand the weight of it until you've worked a while and you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get what we're saying now, and why people like to say it like it is such a innovative thing.
It's something that one of my favorite architects referred to as a day one design. On day one, it's amazing. Like you release, it's great. Day 45, not so amazing. Day 365, and the person who designed it is now gone. And now you're trying to figure out where to go with it. And because we don't believe in documentation anymore, or extensive documentation, and you feel, well, the code will document itself, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever actually tried to read code that someone else wrote 2 years ago that's supposed to document a system. But I think we disproved that theory a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, let alone the code you wrote yourself 6 months ago. You're like, what was I doing here? I don't remember. It was a brain fog. I have no idea what I was writing here in this long 300-line SQL query.
Right.
So
it made sense at the time. Coffee addled at 3 o'clock in the morning. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You brought up earlier that I want to say you said either we don't have the time to do it anymore. What has changed that it does feel like the business wants things now, but hasn't it always been what's really changed there?
Well, it's so this was back before Agile really became a thing, where you had the waterfall method, the government TOGAF, the EA structures, and you would go through, and as an architect, you would use Microsoft Word, and you would document all the requirements. You'd come with these great 100-page documents, and they were erudite and they were thoughtful, and no one ever read them, right? And then they would go and build the thing, or they would read them, and then they would write it to spec. And about a year or two later, you'd have something that came out, and you're like, well, that's not what we wanted, but that's what you wrote. But life's moved on, right? And so these days, it's not that we shouldn't, or we should be writing those big documents. It's that we found that those big documents didn't help us, right? They didn't do the job. I still remember going out and building a data dictionary, again, in Microsoft Word, because that's what you did. And you go and talk to everybody, talk to the SMEs, and you talk to the users, and you write these really great descriptions of your data, right? And then you publish it to the wiki or whatever else, and no one ever reads it, because it's now out of date, right? And it's months out of date. And so we've just had to find ways, especially at scale, of being more flexible with the definitions, right?
Yeah.
It's like one of my favorites. So back in the day, I was talking about the data dictionaries, right? There's a tool that it's one of my favorites of all time. It's called Elation, right?
Okay.
And it's neat because what it does is it takes the idea of a data dictionary and it turns it into a social project, right? So instead of me, the expert, telling you what this column means or what this table means and defining all of our tables, right? Because now a lot of companies have 4,000, 6,000, 100,000 tables, 200,000 data objects, things like that, right? Who's going to document those, right? And the next question becomes, why would you document those? Do they have the same value? Because it's expensive to do that, right?
Yeah.
With Elation, you don't have to do that. You can pull everything in. And then as people are searching, you have people who are data consumers and people who are the data owners. And if a data consumer is looking at a table and goes, I don't know what that means, they can connect to the data owner and ask them. So in that moment, the data owner has the ability to document that column, that table, that thing within context, right?
Yeah.
So if you have 100,000 tables, do you need to document 100,000 tables? Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But you want to document the things that people care about in that moment, and that's how it carries on, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're a user and you want to change something or add something to it, you should be able to do that. And I think that's the difference, is the tools have had to become different because you can't just do it through a central function, right?
Yeah.
Centralized governance, centralized architecture, things like that. You can't just say we're the experts and we're doing everything, because that worked back in the day when there were only 100 people in the company. You got 10,000 people or 20,000 people or 30,000 people in your company. Now all of a sudden you have a problem in that trying to get everyone together, giving everyone a paddle, telling everyone exactly how to write your definitions, right? It's too hard. And if you then take that global and you consider that we have offices in Europe and in Asia, right? And in Australia, trying to come up with a definition that is consistent all the way across there, one person, it's not a thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think it's the same thing with software. So.
Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are happy you referenced Elation. I know at least one VC that I think is invested in, or their company's been invested in there for a while. So, I think we talked a little bit about that when we had a quick chat. How do you like organize teams, like especially like engineering teams? Like how do you view that? Like when organizations are growing, like where do you see like centralized versus decentralized versus what happens? Like, is there a point where decentralized doesn't work? Like, how do you view all of that?
It's actually a great question, because you start out with a 4-person company, right? Everyone knows each other. They're working on common code together. They're pairing up. They're collaborating with each other. They know when the bugs are happening. They don't need to track any of that, right? When you get to 10 people or 20 people, and all of a sudden you need to split into a couple of teams because now the meetings are becoming heavy, and now you need a bug tracker because now you've got 2 different teams that need to communicate in a more official way, right? So you start to build some centralization around it, and then the teams start working together, but they've developed their own build systems and their own rituals because they're doing different things, front end versus back end, things like that. And then you get to, it's so big, you get into 100 people or 200 people, and all of a sudden you've got 13 teams or 14 teams, and they're all doing their own build structure. So then you start to say, well, we'll use Jenkins or something like that as an example, or whatever the latest one is. Because again, new tools every day, right? Or new tools every year. There's some new hotness that's coming down the pipe. Who knows what it is? And so you start to centralize certain parts of it, right? But then when you start to reach 1,000 people, those centralized functions start to break down again. So then it's like cell division, right? At a certain point, the complexity becomes too much for one cell to handle, so you need to split. So now your infrastructure starts to split. And I think it's that constant. It's not so much that you need to be centralized or decentralized. It's that you need to recognize where your company is in the journey, to figure out how you grow, right? And at a certain point, like where I am now, we are far too large at 100,000 people to say, well, we'll centralize everything, right? So we federate, we align, we collaborate, we look at families of technologies, we look at families of paths and things like that, and then try to get as close as we can. Also recognizing that engineers have to have the ability to make good decisions, right? If you take away all those decisions, you're not going to get great results, right? And you can't stop that kind of innovation. You can't stop someone from coming in and going, Flink, best technology ever, right? Whatever the next one is, right? Airflow, best technology ever, right? And I'm sure they are for their case. But part of what architecture then becomes is that, and this is sort of our voice within the company, is that unbiased research, right? Let's go look at that and say, we've got orchestration as a problem. Let's go solve that and understand, do we want to do it internally? Or do we want to buy something versus build something? What are the considerations that we have? And then we start to publish on those. So we understand what it is, what it does, how it scales, how we would scale within the company, because at our level of scale, it is not normal, right? We tend to break most things, including Snowflake, right? And so it's something where you really have to think through, not just what does the technology do, but what does the technology do within our context? How does it work within our scope? And it doesn't. This is the part where I think the vendors get it wrong, right? Where they'll say, well, we can scale to anything, or we can solve any problem, or we can do relational, we can do this, we can do that, we can solve all of your problems. And one thing that misses is the context of how the engineers work together, right? Which engineers do you have? Do you have SQL developers? Do you have people who are great in Java or Python or Scala? What is their structure? And so you really can't say one set of technologies is going to work for every engineering team, right? Or one set of rituals. You really do have to have all those tools in your belt to say, what should we be using? Right? Should we be using EMR or Databricks or Snowflake to do our big data processing? The right answer is based on the size of your company, the complexity of your data, and the structure of your team. Right? If they're all SQL developers, don't put them in EMR, right? But if they're all Scala and Java developers, then it might be overkill for Snowflake, but it might be great for the BI analysts in there, right? So if as you're trying to figure out those things, you really have to understand the structure of your company and what people are doing, so that you're watching, how you're choosing your technologies. And we change every year, right? How many things do we celebrate every year? New languages, new technologies. I just did a research project on ETL frameworks, and someone wanted to know if their idea was patentable. I found within about 10 minutes, I found 45 ETL frameworks out there, or technologies that claim to be ETL frameworks of different styles and methods and languages and structures and commercial, right? So it's not something that there's one answer, right? So
just 45. Give it an hour and you're gonna find like 2,000.
Of course, right? And then we have the internal engineers who say we can build it ourselves, which is sometimes very true, right?
Yeah. Do you have? I'm curious. Do you have a build versus buy mentality or rule framework that you use to try to guide that conversation?
Right. So, and that's a good question. A lot of it comes down to, is it a core? Is it a core function? Is it a defining function within our organization? Is it going to set us apart from other companies, right? And if it's not, if it's a commodity function, let's buy it, right? Or if the vendors in the area are way too complex for what we're doing, if it's just simple, then we can build it, right? So there's a lot of things that go into it, and again, it's one of those things where we can do our own observability, or we could do it through a number of tools, or we could do it hybrid based on low value projects and high value projects. And that's the other part, is that we're not going to put everything in one technology. So what are we going to include in that? What is the value of putting everything into S3 or everything into AWS versus Azure, right? So it's fun.
It has to be. I'm like, is there any good examples of how maybe you did that at Expedia, of how you're like you there may have been a conversation about like building versus buying that you can share?
Well, one of them was the data catalog, right? Of course, we can keep that in Wiki, and we can build it in Confluence, because Confluence is where good documentation goes to die. But the question is, how do you organize it? How do you keep it? How do you keep it relevant? How do you keep it up to date? Because people love writing to a wiki, but they don't keep it updated, right? Engineers don't have time for that. They're willing to go and write something really quickly and then leave them alone. They want to mess with that, right? that was one of those things where we realized that our core value wasn't in actually building a wiki that could be a data catalog to make it searchable. It was in buying a technology that could take care of that for us and provide that kind of social value, right? We were not a hierarchical taxonomy of people. We were a set of 20,000 distributed people, right? And so you needed to provide for the independence, but also the collaboration. And in that, building that kind of software would be an art in itself, and it is really. I mean, if you look at the products out there that are like Elation, if you will, they're hard, right?
Yeah.
And they're the money that you spend on them, totally worth the value that you get out of it, because you bring down the cost. Engineers don't have to worry about writing definitions anymore, because you can codify those things, right? So it makes life a lot easier. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. The other thing that I thought was fun was in building out architecture teams. Often one of the questions I get is, what do architects do, right?
Yeah.
Wear pointy hats, pontificate and drink coffee, tell people their design is terrible. And really, when I started building teams, I decided I wanted to do it differently, because one of the problems you often have is with architects. They have some coding responsibilities, but then they're pulled back from the daily duties, so they can focus on the broader landscape. So then, what is their value, right? If they're just sitting in meetings every day and talking, at the end of the year, I mean, what did you do? Well, I talked a lot. I gave them advice, and they're successful because of me. The engineering team goes, yeah, we listened to them. I'm not sure what, but we did something, right? And so what I realized was that architects need to have need to be able to have measurable, deliverable, value as well, right?
Yeah.
So for my teams, when we're doing technology research, we are publishing all the time. We're writing code and building prototypes. We are, in addition to the technology research and the practice research, we're providing material information in presentations and documents and things like that people then can use to implement standards and run initiatives and things like that. So we're doing the sort of the hard work of measurement, if you will, creating metrics to say, is this program successful? Are we doing the right things here? Well, let's find out. Let's measure it from a few different angles and see if the cost value ratio is the right thing, right? Yeah. So at the end of the year, the architect, when you're saying, well, what did you do? They've got an entire stack of presentations and documents and things to show these are the pieces that we've built. These are the projects we've built out on. It's more than just smart guy sitting in meeting talking about Hadoop.
Yes. And I actually do get that question a lot. I mean, more specifically, most people ask me, like, what's the difference between like a data architect versus a data engineer? But it sounds like you're also referencing maybe, like, is it more of like a platform architect as well in there? So is that kind of the at least three different buckets just to start with?
It is, and that's actually a good point, because some companies will use architects like principal engineers, right? Yeah. They have authority. They work with a team. They set the team standards. They write code for some of the hard projects. They get the team through those things. They do code reviews, things like that. And I really do think of those more as principal engineers, leadership, than I do about architects. They do the design as well, right? Yeah. What I've tried to do with my teams is to pull them out of those projects, because one of the issues you run into, especially when you're trying to do cross-team discussions, is if an architect is on one team, that architect's ability to influence another team becomes biased, right? Well, he's always going to favor his team, or she's always going to favor her own team, things like that, or her own technology, right? She works in Snowflake, so she's going to favor Snowflake by whether biased or not. With my teams, the focus is we own nothing. We don't own projects. We don't own technologies. And what that does is that gives us the ability to be the unbiased arbiter in discussions about technology. Should we use DBT? Is Fivetran viable? These things, and by the way, viable within this context, not viable as a company, of course, it's viable as a company. But are these when we talk about the different decisions, should we be using Scala or Java? You're going to have huge religious debates about that, right? It's just going to happen. And so what you really need is someone to an experienced engineer or architect to be able to come in and say, we've looked at it on this side, we've looked at it from this perspective. Here are the facts, unemotional, unbiased. Now let's make good decisions, right? You don't have to worry about, well, creative metrics to skew the decision, right?
Yeah.
In this case, if you keep your architects above that fray, then you're able to establish far more respect across the organization, right? So now it's that person takes an unbiased view across the technologies. They've done the research. They're not tied to a vendor discussion or something like that, or a build buy, right?
Yeah.
If you've got an architect or you've got an engineer who has built their own orchestration system and someone says, should we buy? That person put months of sweat and tears and late nights and ungodly amounts of caffeine into building that thing. There's no way they're giving that up voluntarily, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think it's interesting. You're referencing a lot of like human things there, right? Like it's not, you're trying to like remove that human emotion almost, it sounds like, because right, if you've built something and then someone asks you, should we build it or should we buy this thing, even if it's better, it's so hard to like look over and be like, let me ignore the thing I just spent the last 6 months doing, and let's have again that unbiased conversation, because it's like, how can you do that? Like it's admitting you did nothing useful for the last 4 months, which
or saying that, hey, you brought us this way this far, let's evolve to the next step. And that's another thing that I think is awfully hard. Is this gets into that when you define projects. I don't know if how many you've defined negatively versus positively. So there's a negative project would be we're going to deprecate this technology, right? Versus we're going to migrate to a new technology. So for instance, what's a good one without getting in trouble? We're going to deprecate an internal reporting system, and we're going to move to Looker, right?
Yeah.
If the project says we're going to move to Looker and we're moving away, we're going to deprecate this old project, all of a sudden you're going to have people holding on to that old project for dear life, right? I built this, I love this, this is what I want, why are you taking this away, right? But if you recast that and set it as an evolution, you start talking about the new business value or the new productivity, or you focus on, these are all the things that are hard about this. Let's elevate you, right? Let's get you out, because again, engineers often will build something and then they'll start loving it and they'll get into it and they'll hold it. Next thing you know, that innovator you had on your team is now an operational maintenance guy or lady, right? And they don't even realize it. They're just working on their thing, and they forget, or they lose the fact that they're no longer innovating. They're now just maintaining this pet, right?
Yeah.
And so helping them to understand, inspiring them to understand where they can go next, right? I think helps when you're trying to deprecate those projects, or you're trying to move to that next technology, right? Recognizing that what they did was huge. And but there's a life cycle, and that's why it's called a life cycle. You have birth and you have death, and projects die. I can't tell you how many of the I'm positive that virtually all, if not all, of the projects I worked on in the 90s are probably dead, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that the code's still out there. It's possible, but there is that time where you have to have that that permission, if you will. You have to give yourself that permission to move on and to elevate and to give over to something that's bigger, right?
Yeah.
So,
do you have any tips on having those conversations with engineers? Because again, we like holding on to the things we've built.
In every single case, what I found is that the wrong way to do it is to say we're deprecating that, it's now legacy, right? Demeaning or putting a negative label on something is a sure way to invoke the wrath, right? In this, it has to be that thoughtful. First is a recognition of the accomplishments made, right?
Yeah.
because every engineer, is bright and thoughtful and intelligent. That's what we do, right?
Yeah.
We're technicians. We build, we create. At the time that you were building it, you were building it for the reasons that you understood, under the stressors you had, in the context you knew. And if 2 years down the line, we're now looking at an enterprise solution that we can buy to replace that, the first thing to do is to recognize the engineering team that built that piece, and understand and help them understand what their next journey is, right? Because the win is that they leave the old project behind to take on the new project, as opposed to are deprived of the old project, right?
Mm,
If you
yeah.
take something away, now you're right. But if they go, okay, we'll just put that in the backlog, we're going to sit that and let that go, because we want to work on this new stuff.
Yeah.
We inspire and lead them. Then you can turn it off because it's no longer used. You
Yeah.
can turn it off because it's no longer part of their life. But you really have to, in terms of getting engineers, or migrating to different technologies, you have to make sure that the people see what their future is going to be, and they see that's going to be a better future, right? They don't want to get stuck into something where you become a config maven, right? I mean, not that configuration is bad, but
No.
as a full-time job, it starts to become painful and soul crushing, right?
Yes. Yes. That's it always does, and it's always hard to, I feel like, figure out what the right balance is between config and actually building new, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting problem we had. I mean, I don't know if this is kind of what you're referring to, but it just makes me think of that. It's an interesting problem we had at Facebook, which was, we had a solution that's very similar to Airflow, where a lot of data engineers were basically put into a world where it's like, you really just write SQL and wrap a little Python around it, which for many data engineers, it's like, it's not what I want to do though. Like, it's not like I get that that's part of my
Right,
job. Like, yes, I always
right,
knew that, like, whatever, some percentage of my job is that, but I want to build, right? Like, there's this desire
right.
to build. I'm curious, is there a way you find people to balance that, even when it's like, again, like, if you were to look at the infrastructure, it makes sense why it was developed that way. It like levels the playing field. A lot more people can build in that framework. But
Mhm.
how do you make sure that people who are very engineering, have that mindset, are kept happy in that
Yeah.
kind of world?
Well, and you're going to have, in every organization, you're going to have innovators and operators, right? You're going to have people who are like, nope, 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 don't change my world. I like this. It's stable. Yeah, I can wrap SQL and Python all day long because I love this. But you're also going to have those innovators who are going to say, no, this is soul crushing. I need to move on. I need to build something new. I need to hit that next horizon. I need something that's hard, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the breakout comes in. It's not the operators are lesser engineers; they're great engineers. It's just some work for or focus on stability, and some focus on change. And so if you've got your team, you want to have a little bit of both, right? You want to have people that are going to keep the lights on and keep things stable and love what they do and be dedicated and tenacious and detail focused, and you're going to want those people who are visionary, this that say, hey, I downloaded this SDK last night, listening framework, and I'm trying it out, and it's really great, and I don't know what it does, but it's going to be amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
that would be like sort of the Gen AI stuff now, right? You got someone that downloaded a piece, and they've loaded your entire wiki into it, and they're like, look, it answers the questions, right? You want a little bit of that, but then you also want the people on the stable side to go, well, wait a minute, how do we make this work, and what are we feeding it, and what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And how do we make sure it doesn't feed our data to the rest of the model?
right, right. It's good for us, but is it good for the rest of the world? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
starts. Are we accidentally sharing keys to this thing, and then are those keys being loaded later on?
yeah,
Can someone access our S3 bucket?
yeah. Please tell me that the keys aren't stored in a Jira ticket in text.
uh,
Uh, so,
the other question I think I was going to kind of poke at, I guess, with I mean, actually, we'll focus on the Gen AI just because I did like that. Like, is there anything interesting that you guys are seeing there that you guys are like, yeah, we see use cases for this, or how do you feel about that? Because again, you've seen far more iterations of hype than I have. So
there's one of my favorite books. I just got done reading it recently. It was called The Alignment Problem by
Mhm.
Brian Christian, and I
Yes.
think it's a brilliant discussion of the history of AI. It goes all the way back to the what was it called? The percolator, the predictor, some little gadget um, that the government came out with, the military came out with, strangely enough, back in the 40s, and they predicted that it was going to replace thinking. You know, it's going to replace people, and you're going to have, you know, things like that. Um, we also thought we were going to have flying cars, and instead we have videos of cats. So you know, it's a whole different, you know, where we go next, who knows? Um, but technology like the LLMs in any of these cases only works when it enhances our lives, right? Then when you try to replace humans, that's where you start to lose the battle, right?
Yeah.
So I think in this, there's a lot of value in it for things like generate test harnesses, try to run pen tests against this code, or things like that, where it can do some of that work and generate the code for that. Um, but for all those people that are saying, well, you know, it's going to replace SQL, there's already a couple of companies that have tried that, where they built natural language models, and the problem isn't the problem isn't that technologies can't understand English. The problem is that English is complex.
Mm.
SQL is a very simple structure, very, very simple. The names and the pieces on the columns and the tables, once you get into it, you can build all kinds of things because it's fixed. English, not so much, right? When I talk about a product, or I talk about a date or something like that, I could mean anything, right? Well, especially in the physical world, right? If we work for Walmart, I want to know the number of units of paper towels that went from our Los Angeles warehouse to our San Francisco warehouse between, you know, February 1st and February, you know, 20th of 2020, right?
Yeah.
You think, well, that could be easy, right? But are you talking about dates PST or Eastern Standard Time? Or are you talking about UTC? And as a unit, a case or a bag or a pallet,
Yeah.
right? And so all of a sudden, even with real objects, you get in trouble. Now turn that into digital objects, views and users and applications and screens and all kinds of things. Um, I don't think we're going to see a lot of that beyond basic code generation for some time, if ever, right?
Yeah.
You can probably spend a lot of time training your AI to build better and better code artifacts for you. But in the end, humans are going to have to look at it and understand it and test it and verify it
Yeah.
after it's been certified. Now you can use that to improve productivity. Absolutely, absolutely. But is it going to replace engineers? I keep seeing those LinkedIn things. Well, it's going to replace programming. There'll be no programming in 5 years. No one will ever program. Really? I don't think so. It's good, but if you've ever been a product manager who has tried to get requirements from somebody and has asked the question, well, what do you want? And been told exactly what they want. Um, I think you can probably relate with the fact that us telling an AI what we want is not necessarily going to get us what we want or
Yeah.
what we need. So
There is that, like you said, there's an interesting alignment problem, and then just like you said, English is hard. And then sometimes the business asks for things without always knowing what they're asking for, which is, you know, it's not. I think the one thing is, I hate saying that, making it sound like, oh, I think the business is dumb. It's not that. It's just that we live in different worlds, you know.
well, that and it's also a matter of asking direct questions. When you say, what do you need or what do you want? The problem with that is a matter of grain, if you think about it, right? I want a report, or I want to know this piece of information. And smart business people aren't sure of which grain you want, right?
Yeah.
Which level of information or detail do you want? How far down do you want to go? What is that piece? What am I doing with it? And what I found there is in terms of gathering requirements, it's far easier, instead of asking them what they want, it's far easier to start asking them what they do
Mm. Yeah.
and listen to them talk about what they do and show you pieces and look for what's hard and where they start to struggle and identify from there, because it's far better than any requirements document ever built. I mean, again, 30 years, I have never actually seen a viable requirements document. There have been lots of well-written, I mean, like well-written, well thought out documents, great, all those things that were good for discussion and the basis. But the at best, a requirements document gets you to a discussion of what needs to happen. It's not something you can just go off and write the spec for something to happen, right?
Yeah.
And you still have to have that that's why Agile works so well when you actually use it, right? When you're actually meeting with your customer on a regular basis and you're talking to them about it, saying, hey, is this it? And they go, no, that's not quite it. Okay, I can adjust that, right? There's having them write requirements every single time becomes a delaying tactic, right? And you are never going to get what you need from documented requirements. It's going to have to be human beings talking to human beings and working together to understand how to build software out. What do you think about this? How do you like this? Right?
Yeah.
On a frequent basis, hopefully, right? Because surprises are awful.
Yes. Yeah. Is that something you've kind of feel like you've incorporated successfully, like something, whether it's like purely agile? Like I think that's the thing that like for most people, it's like, or most engineers, I think they don't like adopt agile to this religious, zealous approach. It's more just like the spirit of agile.
Right. It's the ability to, this is another part, I guess it's a key really, is the ability to be wrong and be okay with that, right? You know, the ability to say, hey, I'm not done with this yet. What do you think? Those kinds of things that are really hard because, especially with engineers and artists, right? When you're creating, you want your creation to be perfect. You want it to be great before you release it. And in the best projects, what you really have is someone who has the courage to say, this is just a draft, a sketch. I'm not sure of it yet. What do you think? And having those discussions early on, because if someone gives you requirements and then you wait 3 months to deliver something, I mean, how many of those have been successful? Honestly, how many of those have been successful? Right? It's the teams that are working on a weekly basis. What do you think? What do you think about this? I don't really like that. Can you change this? Where things are changing and they are bending and they are shifting. But eventually, if you develop that relationship between business and technician or your technical team, you start to develop a flow, right? Where things don't necessarily, they never go in that straight line, right? They may go like this and up and down and back and forth, but they get there, you know, through all that stuff. And then once you've learned how to talk to each other, which takes, again, time, you can start to build faster and faster. But there's no requirements document out there that survives contact with reality. Right.
Yeah. I think, like you said, it is helpful to have the people see, and not necessarily when I say touch, I mean like they say words, words get translated with tons of assumptions. And until you have a dashboard, a model, something that people can like feel to a degree, it's hard to really grasp why something is wrong, like why your translation is wrong, until people see it and they're like, oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that, I meant this, and then I think it moves that conversation faster.
And if you're having that conversation on a daily or weekly basis, then everything's okay, right? Screw ups are fine. Oh, I misunderstood this, no big deal. If you're having that conversation on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, mistakes get a lot harder. They get painful, right? So, sort of like the data science team, you know, if you're talking with them to talk about feature building, right? If you say, look, we can build new features on demand, we can build new features every few days, then they're going to give you a couple at a time. They're going to talk about this and that. You're going to work on little models and you're going to grow, right? Yeah. But if you say, look, you need to give us a list of all the features you have that you're going to need, and then we're going to build it, and then in 3 months, you're going to get the list of features, they're going to put in everything. Yeah. They're going to give you 1,000 potential features because they know that if at 3 months, if they've forgotten anything, they're going to have to wait another 3 months after that, which puts them 6 months out on anything they think about today, right? Yeah. So, you know, I think it is important that you have those close iterations and that the model that allows people to move very, very quickly, while at the same time understanding what the overall goal is, right?
Yeah. So. Awesome. We have a few questions, so I feel like maybe we can dive into that because I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah.
It's already 11:50, so let's pull up a few. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but someone's asking, how do you convince management for buying or building a new technology? Basically, as a tech team, as a data team, we're viewed as cost center to some degree, and companies want to save money. So how do you have that conversation?
What's interesting, and this is a really this happens all the time. Um, Often data is so far away from the revenue stream that it's impossible to connect it to revenue, right? I built a new data system. I built a new pipeline. How does that pipeline impact our revenue, right? How do you do that? And some people have tried to say, well, we're like 1% of the company's gross incremental revenue, so that makes it worth $1 million or something. But those are all funny numbers, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to take a page from marketing on how they evaluate their customers without revenue, right? How they evaluate the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns, right? It's recency, frequency, and engagement. So to turn your data system from a cost center to a value center, the question is not how much money you cost. The question is how much reach and how much impact are you having. I'll give you an example. So if your data system is being used by finance and marketing and sales, your reach is fairly broad.
Yeah.
Now, if it's used by finance only at month end, well then maybe it's just for month end numbers, so that's funny. But if you've got 17 or 20 or 400 finance analysts accessing your data on a daily basis all day long, that's deep engagement and that's deep value, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these things, it's when you talk, and it's a good question on the convincing management, because management tends to work through metrics. And if you can provide hard metrics that shows them the efficiency and effectiveness, and then shows them what the cost is per unit, and that per unit can be per query, per person, per team, things like that. Not just one metric, but across that, to show in different slices of how effective you are.
Mm-hmm.
Then they'll make decisions. So again, if you look at something like Elation, say Elation was, or a data catalog. Let's say a data catalog was $1 million a year. The business is going to go, why would we need that? What's the value of it? But if you can show the number of tickets that you've got with manual changes, the number of incidents that are happening, the amount of time those incidents are causing for downtime, the amount of distraction the engineering team is going through in rebuilding things, all of a sudden you can start to make a case for why productively you can fit in this $500,000 or $1 million piece, right? If you show that, so for instance, if you're looking to scale out your infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. We want to, the fact is we've got 30 or 40 analysts. These 30 or 40 analysts are running 4,000 queries a day. The average query time is running 35 seconds to 4 minutes, which you can start to on a normal curve at a certain point, right? Mm-hmm. By investing, $100,000 in new machines or new capacity, we can reduce that by 30%. All of a sudden, you have more productive analysts, right? You can ask more questions, you get better insights, right? Or by focusing on the fact that we're having trouble, for instance, with the numbers, where the numbers have to continue to be reassessed and corrected, right?
Yeah.
So it's causing issues with you're addressing a pain point that the executives are having. Tying those things in a non-emotional way, not just we need it because it's hard, but physically these are the numbers that are coming out, and we believe we can bounce these numbers. And then after you've made the purchase, showing how those numbers do act, gives you that kind of leverage and that kind of credibility to continue to drive investments. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think it definitely did, at least for myself, because that's always an interesting point, right? It's also the hard part of being the IT team, right? You're just like,
right,
please let us do our jobs better. And they're like, you seem to be doing it okay. Like, they're right. Almost unwilling.
Yep. Well, and
unless
actually,
they know how it's impacting them. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, I can give you another one on that. So say you're using EMR, right? And you've got a budget of $100,000, $200,000 in EMR. So your data teams are all working in EMR, right? And so what the finance team sees is line item EMR $300,000, right? what are they gonna do next year? They go, well, can you reduce that by like 20%? Because we're really trying to pull in budgets and improve our bottom line or our top line in this. Can you pull that in? The reason is because what they see is the technology. Now flip that. Now instead of it being EMR next year, you have $150,000 in the operational pipelines that run the company, and the cost of that is growing at 2% a year over year, right? Which is good because the company's growing at 4%, so your 2% cost makes sense, right? But then you've got these data scientists who are spiking, and they're running at about 50 to 75,000 a year. How much do you want to invest in those? That's a different question. The fidelity with which you can describe your cost drives the fidelity with which you can manage that cost, right? And it turns you from that, again, if you're the finance team is using the tar out of your system, right? If they're really driving it heavy, but they don't know, or your executives don't know, they just see the cost line item. Of course, they're going to look to reduce cost. But if they see that your finance team is driving business decisions at the cost of about 200,000 a year, and they're growing, they've grown by 10 analysts, and your data has grown by 10%. So you're either more effective or you need to be more effective because you need to reduce the query run times. That gets into effective, or that resonates, right?
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Awesome. Let me see. I think do you share resources for the data engineers? Okay, so this is just we probably have time for one more question, so I apologize for everyone else. But someone's asking, do you share resources, for example, data engineers between teams, like data analysts, while being a member of one squad probably gets used in another one? If so, how do you manage that?
It's different with every company. But you can share to a degree. The thing you lose with sharing across teams sometimes is the ownership. And I think that's one of the things that's the most important of anything, is that when you have a project, you have ownership and accountability. Accountability for the data, accountability for the jobs, accountability for the support, things like that. And so when you're sharing engineers across that, sometimes you lose that. Well, I wrote that, but I don't have time for that right now, so someone else is going to have to take that. Oh, I don't own that. I don't use that anymore. Things like that. So it's a balance. There are certain times where you don't need a full-time analyst for one project, but you may give them a portfolio. So with my architects, for instance, we're a horizontal across the verticals. And so they get a portfolio of projects, but they own all of those projects, and they have to go deep within those projects. And at a certain point, when they run out of capacity, we need another architect, right? But because the way we work with it is with measured results, so what each architect is delivering, how much, what their book of business is. Now you can start to organize around how we grow the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's always, again, it's interesting how important it is to understand how to essentially distribute people, so to speak. Like how to best solve these problems also comes down to how to best deploy people. I think we talked about it earlier: centralization, hybrid, all the different ways.
And that gets into that goes into the, you're not just putting someone on there to write code, or if you are, then you're missing the fact that code is going to live, or that data is going to live beyond that person's time there. So who's accountable? Who's going to own it? Because as we know, data is rarely well behaved, if ever well behaved, right? And within 3 to 6 months, it looks like that bush by the side of your yard that you haven't touched in 4 years. And it's growing wild, and there are weeds out there, and it's got all kinds of weird shoots on it, whatever else. So you really do have to have that ownership of at least a domain or a topic, so that you have people who are saying, that's mine, I'll take care of that. Because if you don't, then you get into the snarl and the sprawl and the 4,000 buckets of S3 data that no one's quite sure what's in there, but we know that someone has the password because it's on the wiki somewhere.
And we've ingested it into an LLM, and now that password is out.
Right, for anyone to use, really. It's great.
Yes. So now someone will use it. It might not be our company, but someone will use it.
Someone will get value from it. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Well, Jeff, I want to be mindful of your time, and it is 12. So first of all, thank you so much for your time. I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on this?
No, this was fun. It's one thing I love doing is talking about how you build data organizations and how you do this kind of stuff. It's hard, um, uh, but it's a lot of fun, right? There are some things that you get into in terms of technologies, or you sometimes you get stuck on issues or whatever else. And yeah, anytime you want me back, I'm happy to come back. So
Awesome. Perfect.
yeah,
Tomorrow. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, I'd love that, Jeff. Thank you.
all good. Hey,
All right.
thanks, Ben. I'll catch you
Thank
later.
you. All right. Catch you later. Cool.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.